Standing on the Promises. The journey of Blacks in America from 1619 to 2019. In Genesis chapter 15, God makes a promise to Abram. He promises Abram that he can be certain that his descendants will be enslaved in a foreign land and oppressed for 400 years. But the promise does not stop there. God will judge the country that enslaved his descendants, and then they will exit out of slavery with great possessions. The year was 1619. The first enslaved Africans to arrive to the 13 colonies, Angolans to be exact, arrived to Virginia brought by English colonists who were originally captured by the Portuguese. They arrived at Point Comfort, which today is known as Hampton Roads. The arrival of the enslaved Angolans marked a new chapter in the history of the transatlantic slave trade that began in the early 1500s and ended in and continued through the mid-1800s. In the transatlantic slave trade alone, it is estimated that 17 million Africans were stolen or sold and brought across over the Atlantic Ocean, aka the Middle Passage. This number does not include many who died aboard the ships and jumped overboard. It is estimated that 12 million enslaved Africans made it to the shores of South America, Brazil primarily, the Caribbean, and North America. Slave ships were packed in the lower decks to the brim with Africans that were shackled hands and feet to one another. Tiers were so small and so tight that many could not even sit upright. They were stuck in the darkness of the belly of these boats for months with no air, lying in urine, feces, sickness, and death. Many enslaved Africans died in these horrible conditions, and of course, some decided to jump overboard. Indentured servitude in the colonies slowly faded away as white indentured servants earned their freedom and less were coming over from England as indentured servants, and as more Africans were brought to North America. A racial caste system was established. African servants were held in captivity and the majority were forced to work for the remainder of their lives. Slavery became the ultimate economic engine in North America, with a majority of the enslaved Africans in the United States working on cotton and tobacco plantations. They were forbidden to read and write, working 10 to 12-hour days, and in some cases 14-hour days. Slave masters pitted enslaved Africans against each other. We were forbidden in most cases to marry. Many families were torn apart. Many women, African and African-American women, were raped by white slave owners and white slave masters, and some were used for breeding purposes. We got through oppression with our faith, our spirituality, singing songs and spirituals embedded with code words. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming forward to carry me home. Symbols and assistance from abolitionists. President Abraham Lincoln made a political decision to free the enslaved with the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. But despite what you may think you know or have heard, slavery is not completely abolished in the United States in 2019. As if slavery was not enough, Blacks continue to face racism, injustice, and discrimination through Jim Crow laws and hate groups. Brian Stevenson's Equal Justice Initiative found that nearly 4,000 Black men, women, and children were lynched in the 12 southern states between 1877 and 1950. The Ku Klux Klan, which is a white American hate group that still exists today, used terrorism. They used scare tactics, physical assault, and murder. It was common that you might have seen a burning cross at a church or even outside of your own home. Blacks made it through the civil rights movement, yet several of the movement's most prominent leaders were assassinated by white nationalists. We survived wars, fighting alongside our white comrades, the Civil War, the Vietnam War. Currently, we are in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement. Innocent Blacks are still suffering as victims to police brutality and an unjust and biased criminal justice system that has far too often tried our children as adults, falsely accused and convicted many, and ruled longer sentences for poor people of color. Can we just take a moment? Just take a moment. The election and re-election, the election of President Barack Obama in 2008 and the re-election of President Barack Obama gave Blacks and people of color great hope in a dark world. We saw it as progress, but reality has quickly set in that we are still seen as less than human, hated, and discriminated against by the powers that be, who use their powers to control, oppress, and dismantle and destroy our humanity. You see it each and every single day. What continues to bring us through the worst of times? Racism, police brutality, injustices, defamation, libel, hate speech, racially driven crimes and murders. Our faith. It is our faith that has brought us thus far along the way. It is the Black family. It is the Black matriarch and patriarch. It is the Black church and the Black community. It is our faith and our spirituality and our prayer, our belief in God and in Jesus Christ that has kept us thus far along the way. I will end with two things on this note of promise. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King gave his last speech in 1968. He said, "I just want to do God's will. He's allowed me to go up to the mountain and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I might not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land." I'm so happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. That was his last speech in 1968, right before he was assassinated. The great news is the promise is for all of us. In the New Testament, Paul writes in his epistle to the Galatians, letting them know that they are heirs to the inheritance of the promise, not solely by physical birth, but because of their faith in Jesus Christ, which has made them heirs in the kingdom, in the family. So he says in Galatians chapter 3, verses 28 through 29, there is neither Jew nor Gentile, nor slave nor free, nor man nor woman, or male nor female, for you are all one in Jesus Christ. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. Brothers and sisters, all of my brothers and sisters, continue, no matter what they say, no matter what they do, no matter who lies. God is the final judge. That is in the word. Amen. And the word does not come back void. We will make it to the promised land and continue standing on the promises of God. Thank you. Amen.